Hello, hello. This is Gabriel Fairman. Today I'm going to talk about efficiency and localization. To start off our conversation, let's just first think about the word efficiency, right? So efficiency, in my understanding, is a process with minimum effort to result ratio, right? So let's think about it for a second. So in an efficient process, you put in very little effort to obtain very significant results. And in an inefficient process, you spend a ton of time and a ton of effort, typically, not necessarily time, but a ton of effort for those same results. The key thing is the effort to result ratio. And all right, that's great. You may be thinking, but what does that have to do with translation and localization? Pretty much everything. So from quoting your translation projects to paying your vendors, every single process in translation and localization is impacted by efficiency. So let's think about quoting, for instance, right? When I began quoting over 20 years ago, I thought that every single request had to be quoted differently in order to arrive at an accurate. After all, there were some texts that were ridiculously trivial and simple to translate, and I just from looking at them and analyzing the language and the terminological complexity, I could tell that would be easy, and other texts would be excruciatingly hard to translate and to find people to translate, and whether it was a combination of the language pair or a combination of just the subject matter or their terminology. I believed that every quote had to be analyzed separately in order to arrive at an accurate quote. So I believed in a highly inefficient process in exchange for accuracy, right? That was the trade-off then. And I realized that I was spending all this time quoting, and that A, not necessarily was I always accurate. B, sometimes I was accurate, but I still lost the quote because it was too expensive or the turnaround wasn't good enough. So I lost all of that time invested in it. And C, I realized that by quoting via rules, it was a lot more predictable and a lot more understandable for our clients. So I started to gravitate to rules in exchange for accuracy, right? So there, again, it's very important in this video to keep in mind the exchange, the trade-off that there is between accuracy and efficiency. You typically cannot have everything together all at once. So I decided over time to go towards a better, what I believed was a better balance between efficiency to accuracy ratio. So I began to focus more on word count as guidelines for quoting. I began to abstract a little bit more from subject matter. And maybe I began, not completely, I began to, let's say, instead of looking at every text as an exception, I began to group texts together into degrees of complexity. And that journey continued until ultimately I arrived at a single word price per language pair as determining for quoting. And what's interesting is, again, that while that's in some degrees not necessarily accurate, what I realized was in certain translation jobs, maybe I was charging less than what I'd like. In other translation jobs, I was charging more than what I'd like. But overall, the gain in efficiency way surpassed the gain in accuracy that I was foregoing. So as I slowly gravitated towards rules, an entire universe started to open up to me. Okay, so with more rules, with greater business efficiency, I'm also able to unlock greater results. If I'm able to deliver the quotes faster to my clients, if I'm able to deliver more predictable quotes for my clients, there's a greater chance that they're going to sign off on these quotes. There's a greater chance that they're not going to be negatively surprised by a quote, right? Predictability is a very important factor for people, right? So again, there's a trade-off between accuracy and predictability, accuracy and efficiency. And as I unlocked these rules, the rules then opened up space for automation. As I began to have rules governing my process and the greater focus on efficiency, I started realizing, well, if I'm just working on word count, and if I'm just thinking about weighted word count, which is the word count generated by a log file analysis against my client's translation memory and the coefficients that I attribute to these match types, right? A weighted word count. And we can go into that later. But as I started to focus more on a weighted word count, I started to realize, okay, I have everything that I need in order to provide a quote from its inception. I have the language pair, I have the client, I have their pricing, I have their word count. What prevents me from counting those words automatically and assigning a cost to them? And ultimately, nothing but technology. And that's part of the origin story of BWX. It really is a software that was looking for maximum efficiency in translation management processes. And that really is mind-blowing when you put it in practice, because when you go from, let's say, 30 minutes to 10 minutes to creating a quote just from rules, that's already amazing. But when you go from 10 minutes to not even having to intervene in the quote generation process, that's a very incredible breakthrough, because now all of a sudden, it's not just the time that was previously invested in that you gain back, but it's the mental bandwidth of not worrying about maybe 70, 80% of the quotes that can be automated. Obviously, some quotes, because they require file preparation or because they are very complex multimedia assets, they still require some degree of file preparation, but for the most part, for your run-of-the-mill Word files, PowerPoint files, YAML files, XML files, things that can be regularly addressed through consistent regular expressions or other kinds of parsing that can be modeled and configured into BWX, for all of those you could automate the quoting, and that would greatly unlock a significant amount of automation. And again, what really baffled me was how this automation impacted not just the efficiency of the process itself, but mainly the mental bandwidth that was now freed for my project managers to think a lot more about what was behind the quote, whether that was about following up with their clients and making sure that the quote met their needs, whether it was thinking about what the project guidelines were all about, whether it was about re-inspecting assets to make sure everything was there, right? You have all this free time, this very valuable mental real estate that gets returned back to the project manager to do a lot more higher value activities. So that's, let's say, the effect of efficiency in a quoting process. Now, when it comes to task placement, the same effect again in place, right? I used to believe that task placement was an art, and you required very skillful project managers to do that, because it was based on reputation and based on all these heuristic devices that people came up with over the years to help them evaluate who would be best for any given translation task. And similarly, as I began to evolve into a rule-based paradigm, I realized, okay, maybe I'm losing a little bit of that finesse, a little bit of that exception management when it comes to deciding the person who's most fit for any given job. But in exchange, I am gaining so much more process efficiency, because ultimately, what is job placement, right? You're trying to forecast the qualitative outcome of a given job. You want to make sure that whatever is produced is going to meet or exceed the requirements of a given stakeholder. And if you can measure that, and you can measure that effectively, and you can measure that routinely, and you can measure that sustainably through every single action performed in BWX, now all of a sudden you have very fresh quality data that goes way beyond a test that may have been performed 1, 2, 3, or multiple years ago. So you have this fresh quality data. You have rates entered into the platform. You have profitability guidelines entered into the platform. You have job execution timeframes, basically SLAs, built into the platform. All of a sudden, the platform is in many more ways better equipped than I am to place that job, as knowledgeable as I may be. And in addition, you can build out these custom rules, for instance. So that's the beauty of working with a predictable framework. And that all flows even all the way through payables. I remember that there was a time when for every project I would generate a purchase order, and I would send that over email to a translator. Then after they completed the job, I would add the job to a list of invoices that I was going to run at the end of the month. Then I would ask the translators to invoice my financial team. My financial team would review those invoices, and they would confront those invoices against the POs. And it was a very, very complex process. It would take days. And I began thinking about it, well, why are we doing things this way? I mean, if the job parameters are established from the beginning, if the rates are already established and it's a measure of word count, then what prevents us from generating that payable automatically? And if the translator is agreeing to that payable in the platform, what prevents us from then being able to process that payment automatically and even integrating to a payment gateway? And the answer was, well, nothing, right? And the beauty of all of this is this all creates a highly efficient localization process. You need very, very little energy to produce a ton of translations, very little effort to govern and rule over a ton of translations. It becomes a highly efficient translation process. Really well done, really efficient, let's say. But then, as an industry, really very little energy has been spent on turning that lower layer of translation management, quoting, the job placement, the payables, the quality management, into a highly efficient process. Really, as an industry, I would say that the main solution for that has been to resort to more inexpensive labor. And that enabled people to gloss over or to at least temporarily solve the efficiency problem. Because ultimately, even though they wouldn't solve the problem at the root cause, even though they wouldn't make the process more efficient, it was still very cost effective. So again, there's a very big difference between efficiency and cost effectiveness. But the challenge is that as technology evolves, what happens is this solution of just burying the inefficiency under the rug, it begins to show, right? If you have an inefficient process of job placement, for instance, where you have to, let's say, have a project manager email a bunch of translators or call them on their phones or send them WhatsApp messages, that's going to show in the time to market. It's going to, that gap between task being available and task being placed, that's going to be a negative thing. If you have, if you're making decisions just based on previously decided heuristics and tests, like let's say translator A did really well on a test 5 years ago, but they haven't performed that well in the past 2 weeks, maybe they shouldn't be the person receiving that test. And if you don't have a mechanism to continuously evaluate that and make decisions based on numbers, it's very likely that humans will make poor decisions based on those heuristic devices. So if you have a ton of people just to calculate accounts payable, and those accounts payable, they contain errors or discrepancies, again, all that loss of efficiency, it will find its way back into the content production chain. And with the advent of generative AI, with the advent of content 3.0, really this next level of content that's a combination of user-generated plus AI-generated plus authored content all coming together at once, requiring the need of being almost seamlessly available in a ton of languages and done at a very low cost or a very high efficiency framework. All of those little gaps in efficiency, they all matter. They all matter. And the question really is, in my mind, is how fast is our market as a whole going to take to react to all of this? How fast is our market going to take to understand that these inefficiencies are going to turn companies very quickly into obsolete if people don't do something about it? So that's what we believe in. We believe in maximum efficiency processes. We still believe in exception management. We still believe in the human being having a critical role in making sure that overseeing all of these processes, ensuring that they're all moving in the right direction. Governance, looking at all the data, looking at all the trends, looking at all the analytics, but not necessarily being the one who's hitting send on an email or not necessarily attaching a file, really. It comes down to being able to do minimum work with minimum effort with maximum results. So that's it for the video for today. Hope you liked it. Take care and talk to you soon.